Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm Helen Pitts and I lead HCM customer marketing for Oracle. I am so thrilled and excited to be hosting today's customer spotlight featuring the amazing Jason Ringgenberg of Yellow. Yellow is a leading transporter of industrial, commercial, and retail goods, specializing in solutions for business across North America. They offer a full range of network, advanced information technologies, and proactive customer service. Yellow is comprised of 5 major shipping brands, including Holland, YRC, New Penn, Redaway, and Henry Logistics. Today, we're going to be talking with Yellow to hear insights from the migration of their finance and HR processes to the Oracle Cloud. It's such an exciting transformational journey that I know you're going to be as excited to hear more about it as I am today. But before we dive in, we'd like to get to know each of you in the audience today with just a quick poll. Our question for the poll today: as HR leaders adapt to new business climate, guiding themes have emerged: the need for empathy, resilience, and empowerment. We wish for you to select the 3 most critical actions you think HR teams should prioritize to lead their organizations through this unprecedented disruption. We'll give a few minutes for responses. Wonderful. So it looks like it's pretty evenly split. And that's very common to what we're hearing across the board when we're talking with both business and IT leaders. Now let's learn a little bit more about Yellow. Before we dive in, Yellow is on this amazing mission to exceed the expectations of the customers they serve. And they offer this wonderful broad portfolio of expedited and specialized LTL services. As we traveled throughout the US, I've especially enjoyed seeing Yellow's trucks on the roadways. So let's take now a look at Yellow and learn more about their commitment to the industry through this video.
We are Yellow, but the name you know is now even better. We created the LTL industry, and now we're taking it to the next level by uniting 5 powerful brands and their dedicated employees to become something greater. We may come from different parts of the country, but what unites us is our calling, a commitment to always putting in the miles and always going the extra one. We build on that commitment every day by providing best-in-class service to our customers. As a super regional company, our core services set us apart, including solutions for economy, standard, and guaranteed shipping, as well as next-day and 2-day plus shipping, providing award-winning, on-time, damage-free service. With Holland in the Midwest, New Penn in the Northeast, and Redaway out west, all 3 companies have a well-earned reputation of being leaders in next-day service. Plus, when you combine those regional capabilities with YRC Freight's next-day and national coverage, you get an expansive shipping footprint with the size, scope, and experience that only one of the largest super-regional LTL companies in North America can provide. 90 years ago, we invented LTL shipping. Now, we're continuing that trend of innovation as one united company with one shared mission: to safely and consistently exceed the expectations of everyone we work with. Our dedicated shipping solutions and extensive service options are built to keep your supply chain moving. Discover what we can do for you.
And we're so excited to bring Yellow's story of what they've learned on this continued journey to migrate multiple versions of their heavily customized on-premise PeopleSoft systems to cloud applications. And we know that you'll have questions. So we do have experts waiting online to field your questions. Simply use the Q&A feature and we'll get to as many as we can throughout today's webinar. Please now welcome Jason Ringgenberg, CIO of Yellow, who is joining us live today from Yellow's corporate headquarters. Jason, for the audience, could you please tell us a little bit about your background, about yourself, and also about Yellow?
Sure, Helen. So I've been with Yellow about 7 years now. I joined from Accenture. I was with Accenture for a couple of decades. For my last 5 years there, I ran Accenture's global freight and logistics practice. I did a project for Yellow Freight back in the mid-90s, stayed connected with the company, and then I rejoined back in 2014 as the CIO, and I've been here ever since.
That's so wonderful. And it's nice to see you, so to speak, kind of come back home to Yellow.
Yeah.
I know that over 90 years ago, Yellow created the less than truckload or LTL industry.
Mhm.
So innovation has always been in your blood and in your DNA, and you've continued to evolve to meet customers, and that has been really central to your success as a company going forward. What would you say is the role of technology in Yellow's evolution as a worldwide leading company for 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, as far as technology goes, like every company, I mean, technology started out many, many years ago, decades ago, as a support function. And it was something that was used to, help the business areas, be that sales or customer service. But now you see technology is actually, embedded in every area of the business, such to the point where, it's impossible to do a pickup without technology. You can't service your customers without technology. So it's really pervasive throughout everything that we do, all across the pickup to delivery pipeline.
Which is so true when you see that intersect between business and technology. And I noticed that this has been such a long transformational journey, but it's been so successful. Yellow, I know,
Sure.
decided it was really time to streamline finance and HR operations with ERP and
Hmm.
HCM cloud applications.
Sure.
Can you talk about some of the challenges or the drivers that really led to this conclusion of the need to move forward?
Yeah, there were several of them. I'll go through a few today. So if you turn back the clock, it was in 2014 and 15 when I joined, and at that time we looked at I'll call it our core systems for HR, finance, payroll, et cetera. And what we found was a couple of things. We found that number one, the core of our solutions, which were on-prem PeopleSoft solutions, were coming up on where their support was no longer going to be provided by Oracle. So they were kind of in that 4 to 5 year old, time range. So we discovered that, hey, we needed to do something about the currency of those applications. When you looked at it, I think at Yellow, much like many other companies, we had customized them to such a degree that there wasn't really, I'll call it an upgrade path. We would have had to presumptively, reinstall, re-implement those solutions, number one. Number two, when you look at it, we had a number of other point solutions. So we had PeopleSoft HR, payroll, and finance, but we also had a number of other point solutions that helped us in different areas. Maybe it was collections, maybe it was credit, maybe it was in and around, recruiting. And so it wasn't just as simple as upgrading PeopleSoft. We would have had to upgrade PeopleSoft and then reintegrate all of those other, point solutions to support our business. And then the third thing that we looked at was just the amount of time that my developers spent working on integration. So not actually creating new functionality that helped drive the business forward, but the percentage of time that we spent that was actually just trying to get two different pieces of software to talk together to complete a business process. So when we looked at all of that, we decided, that we needed to make, a change. And at that point in time, we decided to, move away from PeopleSoft.
Right. And I know that as a part of that journey that you were really looking at multiple providers, but you finally
Mhm.
decided that there was a benefit of going with one single vendor to really provide the functionality and the environment that you really needed as you continue to grow as a company. What were the key drivers behind that? And really, what was the benefit of doing so, moving to one single vendor?
Yeah, so the first decision that we actually made was that we were going to pick, one vendor and we were going to pick one provider. And we did that for a number of reasons, Helen. Number one, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have to have kind of a battle of A says B and B says A. So we wanted to have, one vendor that provided us both HCM and ERP functionality. The second reason that we did it was we wanted to make sure that when we did upgrades, all those upgrades would be on the same path. And then number three, to the extent possible, we wanted to be able to get out of the business of, interfaces. We didn't want to have to interface two different products together. And then lastly, just from a pure security perspective, we felt like to have dependence on one vendor from an information security perspective would be better than having, dependencies on multiple. And we actually made the decision to go to one vendor before we made the decision of what that vendor would be. And we even made that decision on one vendor before we finalized our decision to move to the cloud. So we were still considered on-prem solutions when we decided to go to one vendor for HCM and ERP.
So, really, a thoughtful, strategic process behind making this move forward. I know that you mentioned security, and I know that some organizations have been very hesitant to deploy a similar migration because of the handling of very sensitive financial and personal data. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed those concerns as a part of this migration journey?
Yeah, sure. When we looked at it from our perspective, we said, okay, what are the biggest weaknesses in our information security today? And if you look, this was back in 2015, and I think a lot of these are still, apropos today. But when we looked at it, patching was a big problem. So all these patches, and you have to be able to manage those patches. And how do you patch VMware without knowing what version of Linux you're running, et cetera, et cetera. So patching was, part of that consideration. And when we looked at Oracle and other cloud providers, from the Oracle perspective, because Oracle, controlled the infrastructure, the application stack and everything, we felt like that they were going to do a better job patching, and it was going to be easier for them to maintain that currency. And the fact of the matter is probably be able to patch our environment before we would have potentially even known that vulnerability existed. So patching was absolutely a big part of it. The second thing that we considered was, just from the process perspective, I mean, people can make mistakes. And when we had to patch our HCM and ERP environments on-prem, we did that once. And we typically did that when we did upgrades or when we did point releases. So it was something that we did very infrequently. Whereas in the cloud environment, Oracle and other vendors would be able to patch lots and lots and would be able to automate that. And we just felt like with the automation of, changes to the environment, you would be able to reduce that risk profile. Then when we looked at, encryption and encrypting data at rest, we thought, well, Oracle manages our database today. Who better to manage that? That risk to be able to encrypt the data and do those things, better than Oracle. And then lastly, we just didn't have the perspective that said, that just because something is in our data center, means that it's safe. I mean, we didn't really fundamentally believe that there was a competitive advantage that we would have over Oracle or the other providers in terms of, being able to protect the data center. So it went down to all of those things, but fundamentally, we just thought that Oracle at the end of the day would be able to do a better job managing that information security and the vulnerabilities than we would be able to do on-prem.
Which is such a compelling answer in terms of all the steps that you've gone through, and it's been so thoughtful in terms of that journey, and really the increase of efficiency and automation and the protection of data are really some of the results that you and I have talked about. Can you share a little bit more about some of the results that you've experienced so far as a part of the implementation? I know that the audience is really eager to hear more about that as well.
Yeah, sure. So like I said, Helen, we started our journey back in 2015, very late 2015 is when we finalized our decision to both go to the cloud, and that we also just made our decision to go to Oracle. The slide that they're showing right now kind of shows back in that 2015-16 time period, what we had. At that time, Henry wasn't an entity yet for us. That's why it's blank, but we had PeopleSoft across 3 of our 5 operating companies. We had other vendors at Holland, and then we had a number of other point solutions that were in there. And so what we did was we made the decision to say, hey, we're going to move everything, to Oracle Cloud. And this is kind of where we're at, today. So we moved everything over. When we started our journey, Taleo was very much, still part of the solution that we had. We are now in process of moving, everything that we have in Taleo to Oracle Recruiting Cloud and Oracle, Learning Cloud, such that by the end of Q4 this year, we believe that we will have everything up and running in the Oracle Cloud and all of the point solutions that have been there. So the benefits that we think that we've received, if you look at just from an availability perspective of the solutions, availability's been, I would say, better than it was when we had the on-prem solution. So if you look at the amount of downtime that we've had, I'll call it since, we got payroll converted a couple of years ago, it's really been better than what we had on-prem. Many of the interfaces that we needed to maintain and support before, we no longer have to maintain. Part of the reason that we looked at Oracle, I shouldn't say looked at Oracle, but one of the advantages that we thought Oracle had was that much of the integration between HCM and ERP was done at the database level. So it wasn't necessarily a programming language that was provided by the ERP and HCM provider, but rather it was handled, at the database level. One of the problems that we had with our on-prem solutions, I would say, is twofold. I would say, the first one, I'll tie, adoption. So even though we ran PeopleSoft and we ran PeopleSoft for more than 15 years, there were components of PeopleSoft that we did not use, Whereas our adoption of new functionality, for example, in HCM, when we went live and where we're at today, we have more HCM modules up and running now than we did when we went live. And then the last thing, we talked a little bit about it. I mean, for us as a company, currency was a challenge. Not that we weren't able to maintain currency and support, but every 4 to 5 years, it was basically a re-implementation where you go, you do your conference room pilots, you get the new software, you figure everything out, and then you go through and you re-implement it. And that, culminates with kind of this end-to-end system test. Well, we wanted to be able to not have to do that anymore. And so one of the big benefits that we get is, in and around currency, every quarter we get a new update. And we get that update. It's at the same time for HCM and ERP. It happens over a weekend. At the time, Oracle called it virtual currency or virtual. I'm not sure what they call it today, but we really wanted a multi-cloud, a multi-tenant cloud solution. You guys called it virtual tenancy, I believe, or virtual hosting, where we wanted to be forced and incented to be able to stay current, but we wanted to have some flexibility as, what week of the quarter we went to do that. So, we've got currency, we've got better adoption. We're using a bigger part of the software today than we did before. We kind of got out of the interface game. We've had very, very good availability. So those are just a few of the things that we've got since we switched to the cloud version starting in our early 2016.
Wow, and it's been quite a journey, and the results that you've had so far have been tremendous. I know we're so excited about some of the new functionality that you continue to uptake and continue to roll out through the end of this year, particularly around recruiting and learning. It's very exciting for us to see your HCM journey, and you've been such a wonderful partner with us along the way. It has been a journey, but let's talk a little bit about what's next. What's the next phase of implementation ahead for Yellow?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say, kind of I'll paraphrase it. I'll say, what we have going on now. And then once we get through that, we'll talk about, what's next. But, really what we're working on right now is a couple of things. So our last operating company, Holland, we're bringing into, the ERP and the full HCM suite of tools. We have everybody up and running on payroll right now, but we're going to do the ERP conversion in Holland. And then as alluded to on the previous slide, right now we're in the throes and we believe, we'll finish it up here. Probably roughly this time next year, we'll be able to do the full conversion off of Taleo and onto Oracle Recruiting Cloud and Oracle Learning Cloud. So those are really the two big focus areas for TJ and Jennifer and their team here coming up over the next year. And then we get to kind of what's next. And when we look at what's next beyond HR, payroll, and from an HR and HCM perspective, we pretty much use all of the modules from, compensation, succession planning, learning, recruiting, core HR, payroll, et cetera. Really, then what comes next is a couple of different things. So in the HR space, I think it's really, you could fundamentally talk about the biggest issue, not the biggest issues, but the biggest opportunity areas for us is how do we make the solution easier for our people? So what are we going to do in terms of an HR help desk? How are we going to go into the mobile platform? So how are we going to push the ease of using to that? And then within ERP, there are some things that we want to do kind of inside of the core ERP components that we own today. And then there's also some things that we want to do. So when we started the finance journey, we started with the payables portion of it. We started with the general ledger. And now, as JP and others on the call today know, we were really looking to get to say, okay, well, what could we do potentially about, credit, collections, invoicing, those things. So kind of the revenue side of it. So those, I think, would be the things that would be, I'd say, what's next for us. Those are the things that we're looking at starting roughly this time next year.
And I've loved really that you continue to look at the overall employee experience. How are you deepening those relationships with customers, providing those new channels for communication,
Sure.
that self-service option, but still looking at some of the really inherent ERP functions and really developing those further. It's been such an exciting opportunity to partner with you, and we're so excited of what's ahead. But when you undergo such an amazing transformation, it doesn't go without there being some surprises. What were some surprises, or what surprised you most about this particular project as you're migrating over from on-premise to cloud applications?
Yeah, there were a few things that surprised us. So number one, I think we probably underestimated up front, segregation of duties and roles and responsibilities. And when we started, we probably spent too much effort trying to, if you will, bend Oracle's functionality to fit our process, be that a Sarbanes-Oxley process or an HR process. And we started to configure roles that had kind of the attributes of the permissions that those people in their current jobs had underneath our PeopleSoft system. And that caused us a couple of challenges downstream. One of the challenges we had was in the area of performance, because we had such specific roles that had such very granular micro levels of permissions, that we probably should have taken a bigger step back. And if we would have been able to do it again, we would have taken a bigger step back and said, okay, hey, how do we need to look at our roles, and what changes can we make to our roles to still provide the level of support and governance that we need as an organization, but without as many custom roles. So that was one of the challenges that we faced. The second challenge that we faced is early on we had a couple of issues. And as it turns out, they were things that we actually had the permissions to do, but we ended up calling Oracle's customer success managers at the time and say, hey, we can't get this to work. And typically what would happen is they would fix it for us, and then they would call us back and say, hey, you can really do this yourself. So we didn't really, I think, have as good understanding of the boundaries of what we can do versus what we really need to go to Oracle support for. The other thing that we've, I think, constantly evolved in is, when we started, we went out and we bought a certain number of instances to provide, staging areas to do our development, to, test the new releases of the software that they come out, to provide a QA environment, et cetera, et cetera. And probably halfway through our implementation, we went out and we got another instance. And then even now, since since we got everybody in the company up and running on Oracle payroll, we went out and we provided yet another instance. We just found that there's a lot of flexibility that you have with other instances to be able to work on, smaller components, to take a more agile-like approach, and to have different Scrum teams working in different instances, has been a big benefit for us. So those are some of the things that I don't think that we necessarily probably, would have expected, up front that came about, that I would definitely consider and make some changes on. If we knew what we knew today back in 2016 when we started, we would have made those changes.
And they always say hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
So I know,
Sure.
so I know that these lessons that you've been sharing, those lessons learned and your insights, I think are going to be so helpful to many that are already on similar paths, listening here along with us today, or considering that. I wanted to ask you, beyond the initial implementation, what other key learnings can you share with our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting for us is really the mix of what IT does and what our business partners in your area, Helen, in the HCM or the HR side, what do they do? And now they've really got a much more leadership position in going through the release notes and looking at the functionality and talking about the areas of the software that we don't use today, whether that is different areas of the software we don't do today, or whether it is the help desk components, whether it is the mobile components, the other things that have been coming out there. So they are a lot more involved and a lot more in a forward position around, hey, what comes next, versus waiting on IT to determine, hey, which module we're going to install next, or which software that we're going to buy, next, number one. And then number two, we don't need to have as many people, in and around interfaces and some of the things that we used to before. So our people could spend more time on, how can we help with the adoption of new capabilities and things like that. And that's been evidenced by the fact, if you look at the capabilities that we had when we first went live compared to the capabilities that we have today, not only, as the slide alluded to earlier, do we have a larger component of our business using the Oracle Cloud, but in each of those little clouds that we had on the slide, there's actually more functionality that we're using today than we used before. So, we talked about early on, and I mentioned earlier today, we talked about wanting to maintain currency, and we talked about, innovation and wanting to have adoption. Well, as a matter of fact, both of those things have proven true for us.
Which is wonderful. I love hearing about the increased focus on innovation and that true partnership now that IT is really having with business to really bring forth that innovation and really leverage that capability as you continue to evolve as a business. Really love hearing that from you, Jason. I think we may have lost Jason, unfortunately. And I'm wondering, while we're waiting for Jason, should we look potentially to move forward with the polling question? Wonderful. I know many of the audience here today is really looking at migration to cloud. So our poll question to you is, what are you most likely to implement next? Are you looking at finance, HR, supply chain, manufacturing, sales, customer service, or marketing? We'll give everyone a few moments to respond. Interestingly enough, and I love seeing this, that HR is really what many of you looking to move forward with about 40% of you there. And then it's evenly split between finance and supply chain. We're seeing so many companies now moving forward with HR transformation, but also really looking at integrating that as a part of a broader unified back office. So really, how do you connect HR with your supply chain, manufacturing, and then also with your ERP functions? Well, we had lost Jason, but good news, he's back with us here to continue our conversation. So let's dive in. So Jason, in what other ways has the migration of key business functions changed your company?
Yeah, Helen, I would say the biggest change for us is before, when we were running everything on-prem before we moved to the Oracle Cloud, we made major changes in those areas, but we did it every few years. And most of the time that coincided with a major upgrade to the software. Where ever since we went to the cloud, instead of making these big monumental changes that require basically a re-implementation of the software, every quarter now, we take a look at the release notes and we deploy the new functionality. We look at the new capabilities that are coming. Some of that has been in, different areas as we've started the migration from Taleo to Oracle Recruiting Cloud and Oracle Learning Cloud, but also some of the mobile components and things like that. Where before we had batches, we did them very infrequently. Now it's every quarter.
So there's really such business efficiency and value with having those quarterly releases and really uptaking that. And that's such a wonderful thing to hear. I did want to ask you a little bit also, because we talked quite a bit about current market conditions more directly. How likely are these to help accelerate the need and or the willingness for many businesses to change? And what's the advice you would give other leaders and innovators who are here with us today listening?
Yeah, I think the one thing, just to carry on with what we were just talking about, the quarterly updates. It used to be when you wanted to do something new, if that something new was only available in the new version of the software, you had to replace the 80 or the 90% that you already had in the previous version. And you had to go through this long cycle, conference room pilot, design, programming, testing, and implementation. Where now, when Oracle comes out with new functions and features that you want or that our business users want, we can deploy them as part of the next quarterly release. So we don't have to go back and every time something new comes out. The other thing that we have that's going to come along much quicker before is in the cloud, Oracle is going to be able to bring machine learning and other capabilities to our solutions that you just wouldn't be able to do in an on-prem model with any predictability or with near the speed with which those are coming in the cloud.
And that's so powerful. So again, I know that we were talking a little bit about other business leaders and kind of some advice that you might want to impart upon them as they're looking to be making this kind of change. What are some thoughts that you might wish to offer to those listening today?
Yeah, if we look back at our journey, so if we would have known everything that we knew in 2015 that we know today, we still would have made the same decisions. We still would have made the decision to go to the cloud, and we still would have made the same decision to use Oracle. So we're very confident, we're very happy with our decision. But if I was out there taking a look from other people, the first thing that I would say is if you're out there and you're looking to go to the cloud, and you're looking particularly between HCM and ERP, if you're looking at a solution that's from two different vendors, I would ask them all, whether they are on the HR side or the finance or the IT side, I'd ask them to pause and I would say, why? I just think there's so many advantages that you get to only having, in our case, all of the software is updated together. Every time Oracle improves the integration between the modules, you get that integration. It's just one vendor that you have to worry about protecting your software. It's only one set of upgrades you have to go through. So my number one piece of advice would be for those people that want to go to I'll call it a multi-tower or multi-vendor cloud solution, I would ask them to take a pause back and say, do you really need to be able to do that? That's probably the key piece of advice that I would give people.
And that's some very sound advice, and I appreciate you sharing that. I know that we've had quite a number of questions that has come in from the audience. Several are really eager to get your thoughts and insights. If we can transition to that, let me start with the first one that's come in, which I find really thought-provoking. And it's really, As a technology leader, what advice would you give to our audience on the importance of choosing the right partner for a transformational initiative such as this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to look at the partner term very, very seriously. And I think partner is actually, Helen, the right word for it. When you move to the cloud as we did, Oracle's organization really becomes a day-to-day extension of my organization. They are responsible for the uptime and availability of the solution. They're responsible for the maintenance and enhancement of the solution. They're responsible for securing the solution. So it's no longer a customer vendor relationship. It is a partnership. So there has been things that we've done in this relationship that maybe differ from the partnerships that we have on-prem. I think we are probably more willing to share feedback. We're more willing to participate in other communities and forums because we are now a part of an ecosystem that as that ecosystem does better and better, that we actually do better and better. So I think that, that's something that people need to consider. It really is a partnership, and it is something that success is joint.
And I know we certainly view that partnership in the same way. We are so honored to have you be a part of our HCM customer ecosystem, and we really value the insights that you give us. Another question, what would you do differently, if anything?
Yeah, probably the number one thing we would have done differently is when we started out, it was new. It was 2015, and we were kind of somewhere between, I would say, what is now a more agile cloud-like implementation where we had, sprints and we did things in smaller pieces. We were probably somewhere between there, and I'll call it a traditional on-prem, implementation. If we had to do it over again, we would have started that agile cloud-like development sooner. So for example, when we got down to payroll, we went out and we said, okay, instead of trying to get everything in payroll up and running, we said, let's pick, and it was around a dozen people that covered part-time employees, full-time employees, people that had paid their way through Social Security, people that hadn't, people that had maxed out their 401k, people that hadn't. And we picked like a dozen people, and we paid them all $1, and we actually took it all the way to that dollar going to their checking account. And the learning that we got from that to help us the next several weeks was unbelievably beneficial. The other thing that we did that we would have probably done slightly different, we did what we called a parallel test where we ran it. We ran the data through our on-prem solution and then through Oracle Cloud. We probably would have started that end-to-end testing slightly earlier. And then I may have mentioned earlier that we ended up getting another instance to manage it. We probably would have bought that other instance up front. It just made the logistics of navigating between the different, development and test environments and production easier.
That's some great advice, and I love hearing that. The last question that we've got, because I know we're running low on time, is one that I think you'll really enjoy. It's Jason, what's the best part of your job?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that I would have answered differently a year ago. I mean, the pandemic has really, placed a spotlight on the trucking industry and on truckers, and we have, tens of thousands of drivers that, every day since the pandemic began, go out there, they pick up freight, they move lots of things that were, used to help us combat COVID and other things. So I think, the understanding of society of the value of the industrial supply chain and, just how much truckers and, people that work in, terminals, mean for our country. So I think it's a huge thing to be able to, support with technology as fast as technology is advancing, those folks that do have, an essential job and, and where we're going. So that's been probably the thing that I like best about my job is just the recognition that those folks that, show up at one of our terminals every day to deliver freight, that hopefully the things that we're doing within technology makes their job just a little bit better and a little bit easier.
And that's so wonderful. I know that that's embodies so much of the culture that you have and the employee experience that you're really focused on at Yellow across all of your brands. And I wanted to thank you personally and all of the team because you've kept our country going during this time of crisis. And you've been such a valued partner to us, not just working with Oracle, but in getting our supply chain and getting the critical things we need. And your essential workers are so valued. So thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's our pleasure.
Um, I know, Jason, we've so valued having you here today. I really wanted to thank you on behalf of Oracle for spending some time with us to share your journey at Yellow. It's been so transformational and we've so enjoyed being a part of it. We're looking forward to having more conversations with you and sharing more about your journey as you continue to evolve. And it's been such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. And we'll really appreciate all you're doing with the team at Yellow.
Thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it.
To follow up and learn more, please visit the Oracle Spotlight Yellow community page for additional resources and ways to stay connected. And for your convenience, we've pasted the URL in the chat, so feel free to bookmark it and visit it often. We can help you get connected to the right team, and we'd love to do so. We also would like you to complete a one-question survey about today's webcast. Please take a few seconds to give us your feedback. It's so valued. And please tune in for our next Customer Spotlight, which I'm very excited about, which will feature Baylor University. We look forward to seeing you soon on our next Customer Spotlight webcast.